Christia Brown is a psychology professor who specializes in the development of gender and ethnic identities. I spoke with Christia about how children are encouraged to fill societal gender norms and about the challenges people face who identify with multiple marginalized groups. How important is it for parents to discuss race and gender with their children, and how do you recommend that they approach these topics?
Well, I think it's critically important for parents to talk about race and gender with their kids. They're some of the most important categories that we belong to. We put a lot of attention on them in lots of ways. We treat them as important, and there's lots of inequalities because of race and gender. And so we kind of toss kids into these social groups and we expect them to navigate it and figure out it on their own. And if we don't really talk to them early about what it means, what it doesn't mean, and the ways in which racism and sexism play out, they're left to figure out, what does this mean? And often their answers are kind of stereotypical. They often reinforce the biases that they see out in the world. And so parents can talk to kids when they're young in very everyday conversations, in the small conversations as you're just navigating your lives, to help kids really see what these groups mean and what the limitations aren't because of these groups.
And then what are some of the differences parents face in raising boys today as opposed to raising girls?
We have ways in which we think about girls who can be tomboys, and we encourage girls to be assertive and to play sports and to pursue math and sciences. But boys, we often aren't encouraging them to be caring and nurturing, to play with dolls, to show their emotions and express how they're feeling to people. So there's a lot of limits that boys face. At the same time, we want them to do well in school, but yet we also tell them not to kind of ask for help when they need it. We aren't really talking to boys about what their feelings are, about how they're feeling sad or frustrated, and yet all the toys that we give to them for the most part involve guns or violence of some kind. So we're really setting boys up to be tough, to not ask for help, to not show vulnerability, and the only really modeling we give for them are really aggressive types of ways to show those emotions.
Is there also a concern that perhaps both boys and girls are trying so hard to stay away from stereotypical gender norms nowadays that there's sometimes a feeling that there's a problem when, say, a boy embodies stereotypical masculine characteristics?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's a lot of problems whenever we say how you want to be a boy or how you want to be a girl is a problem. I think trying to limit it in any way is where we become where we kind of get into problems. I think there's a huge spectrum of behaviors and likes and personalities and traits that are really normal. And so I think as parents and as teachers, our goal is to figure out what exactly is this particular child good at? What do they enjoy? What is their personality like? And how can we foster and support that, no matter where on the spectrum that falls?
Right, and of course people are multifaceted when it comes to race, culture, gender, and economic status. So what sorts of challenges can this create, especially for individuals who come from multiple stigmatized or marginalized groups?
I mean, I think that's an important issue to think about. We are all complex people. So the different groups that we belong to are different kind of experiences all contribute to how we think about ourselves, how we think about other people. So helping kids recognize the value in their groups, the ways in which they can be proud of who they are, despite what the kind of cultural messages might be about their group, helping them see that there's a lot of common humanity in all of us, and so helping kids recognize that in themselves, even if it's not reflected in the media messages they're seeing or kind of the cultural representations that are out there for each child.
And in your research, you say that while sexism still exists, the way it is displayed has changed a little bit. Can you explain how this is impacting the younger generation?
I think one of the biggest ways that we see sexism now is in that the idea that girls are really supposed to be highly sexualized all the time. So people kind of recognize women go into the workforce and can be doctors and lawyers, but the idea that everybody to have value should look to girls to be sexualized and sexy, and that boys should be interested in girls in that way, and that they shouldn't be legitimate friends, for example. I think that's a really damaging form of sexism that's really limiting both boys and girls. It limits the friendships that they form. It limits the kind of healthy relationships that we want them to have as they go into adolescence. And so I think that's new, but it's just as damaging as the older forms of sexism we saw 30 years ago.
Right, and another thing that's new to society relatively is the rise of social media. Do you believe that it is hurtful, promoting hate speech around typical gender stereotypes, or has it provided a safe outlet for young adults to express themselves and to reach out to others who may be like them?
I think social media is both of those things. I think it can be at its best. It can help us connect to others. It helps us see ourselves in others. It helps us see a wide representation. I think for the early adolescent, the 8th grader who's in a small town where they feel like no one understands who they are, I think social media can really be a connection to others that are similar to them. It helps us see people that look like us, and that is really powerful for people to feel good about themselves. But it also gives voice to the worst parts of people too, and particularly when it's targeted to kids and adolescents, we know that can be damaging. It's as impactful as bullying that's face-to-face. So, parents have to really be monitoring in the same way that you're checking in with kids about bullying or negative experiences at school.
And as a child, I was raised by a mother who was very, very much affected by the women's movement that was going on around her at the time. So I was told anything boys can do, you can do better. So I was definitely, I think, a beneficiary of some of the changing gender norms or expectations of the time. I'm curious as to whether you think gender stereotypes and sexism are still impacting the career choices and even hobbies that younger people are making today, perhaps without them even knowing it.
Yeah, you see the patterns. You still see differences in, for example, the types of majors that young men and women are having. So although girls are going into engineering at more, at higher numbers than they were before, it's still not anywhere close to what boys are doing. In terms of the humanities, you're seeing boys not going into things that are focused in reading and the arts as much as girls are. Things like nursing and education are still predominantly young women. You're also seeing hobbies that differ. I think as long as we reinforce to girls things that are really appearance-based and boys being much more active and science-based, you're going to see differences really from the beginning. And that's what you see in the types of pursuits kids are having, and that leads to differences in college and then ultimately differences in careers. And so that hasn't really changed very much over the past 30 years.
Fascinating stuff and so important. Christia Brown, thank you so much for sharing your insight.
Thank you.